We are live.
We are live. Good morning, everybody. I'm Ian Trevethan, the Education and Outreach Manager here at the Scion here with our Director, Dr. Reese Barrick, who is, so you can't really see him, but he's here. Say hi, Reese.
Hola, ¿qué tal?
So we're talking today about things like this.
What is this?
Well, this is a Megacephalosaurus.
A mega what?
A Megacephalosaurus. You know, mega means huge or big. Cephalo means head. Saurus means lizard or reptile. It's a big-headed lizard.
Doesn't look like a lizard. Is it really a lizard?
It's a lizard. It's a reptile. It's a marine reptile. So, if you get a good look at this thing, Reese, why don't you look at the reconstruction of this animal? Now, one of the things that people really enjoy when they come here to the museum is they enjoy these sort of life reconstructions. And upstairs, where it's dark right now, so it wasn't a good place to start, we've got a couple of dinosaurs that move. They're animated. And it seems like the general public, more especially kids, but even adults, are willing to suspend their disbelief. You know, they know that these are representations of animals that are extinct. They're no longer with us in our time. So it takes a degree of imagination to reconstruct and imagine what these animals were like in their world. And often what we do as scientists is, you know, we learn from the fossils, we learn from the rocks, we learn by comparison, we learn from all of the clues that the fossils and all of that stuff together tell us, and then we're able to reconstruct animals and their environments. But we're also kind of, in an interesting way, storytellers. And this is one of the ways we can tell a story, is by reconstructing what this animal would have looked like with its skin on and in its natural environment and moving around in a really natural way and sometimes a dramatic way. And I don't mean a fictional dramatic way. In this case, this animal is a very dramatic animal.
He's flying. Why is he flying?
Well, he's what we would call a subaqueous flyer or underwater flyer. So you have to use your imagination that, you know, we're standing in 600 feet of water and that he is flying through the water.
Is he a submariner or is he a submariner?
Well, I'm from Seattle, so I'm going to say submariner. Well, I'm not from Seattle. I'm from Washington. Seattle is where the Mariners are. Okay, I just totally sidelined myself. What was I talking about, Reese? I was on a roll, and I totally got distracted. Thank you. So, one of the things that I've been sort of attracted to ever since I was a kid is I really, really enjoy and am fascinated not just by fossils and the animals that those fossils once belonged to, but sort of whenever I would watch a movie or a television show and they would have creatures or robots or, you know, any kind of thing that would grab my imagination that had to be reconstructed, that were things that we don't have in everyday life that I could not observe, I was fascinated by how these things were put together. So it was never good enough for me to just watch something on TV and maybe go and buy a toy or an action figure and be satisfied by that. I wanted to know how this thing was built. I wanted to know what the process was. In the case of a costume, I needed to know what it was like inside of that costume. I wanted to know how uncomfortable and sweaty it would get. You know, if it was somebody inside of a puppet making these things come to life, I wanted to know what that was about. Well, it turns out this odd set of tendencies of mine has actually kind of served me well in my professional career as a science communicator, and specifically a paleontological science communicator, because Well, we use these kinds of things to tell the story, in this case, of paleontology, of a time when there were creatures that we can't observe anymore.
Wait, did this passion of yours start with 1 million BC or with Godzilla?
I would have to go with Godzilla. Because that's a guy in a suit. How cool is that? Like, how could you not want to dress up in a monster suit and step on a miniature city? And think about what goes into building that suit, and then that city, and then somebody gets in the suit and steps on the city that you just built.
I guess that's better than the claymation Allosaurus in 1 million BC.
Yeah, well, no, I don't know. That's kind of cool too. It's right up there, with the like three-headed. What is that? I can't remember the name of the three-headed Godzilla monster now. Is it Ghidorah?
Ghidorah.
Ghidorah?
King Ghidorah.
King Ghidorah? I don't know. I'm sure there's a Godzilla fan out there that's going to just beat me up now because I messed it up. But where I'm leading with this is every once in a while in my career as an outreach educator, most of the time what I bring with us are teaching materials, teaching specimens from our zoological collection, teaching specimens from our paleontological collection, which is generally mostly made up of fossil casts. Every once in a while I'll have access to a fossil that doesn't have any locality data or is incomplete enough that it doesn't have enough information for research, and that's when it's given to my department. So I'm able to bring actual fossils out to the public, but even in that case, sometimes a single vertebra or a single tooth or a partial skull cast doesn't quite do what this kind of thing does. So how does a guy in my position bring this element of the museum
A really big truck.
out on the road? And the answer is a really big truck. But before I discovered that, because I didn't think that far ahead, let me show you where I start. Actually, I don't have the thing what I started with, but Reese, what did I start with? Do you remember?
Let's see.
What was the first
You
thing
started
I
with,
did when I got here?
you made a cast of a skull of a, what was it, mosasaur or plesiosaur?
I don't even think I even did that yet. I think that was the second thing I did.
Oh, okay.
I think the first thing I did was we decided we needed a mobile dig pit. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
So, again, this is an element of our museum, right? That is very, very popular with the youngins. And actually, I catch adults in there all the time, too. So upstairs, we have a dig pit where we have sand that covers a bunch of our really big marine critter casts. So you get a shark in there. I think you get a Megacephalosaurus in there. I think there's probably some mosasaur material in there. I definitely a fish in there. I think there's a Xiphactinus in there, right? So for the purpose of going out on the road, we want to bring that. Are we losing?
Okay.
We're going back into the dungeon. So if we lose our connection, just anyways, the challenge is to bring some of these popular things from the museum to the public in different ways. So sometimes this might be a public event like a carnival or a fair, or I've been to the state fair a couple of times. Not the state fair, the county fair a couple of times. Later this year in October, I've been invited to an Oktoberfest. I think somewhere south of here. Not the Hayes Oktoberfest, although I've been invited there too. I've been invited to come and do Cub Scout stuff. We do Comic-Cons. So how do I bring these really cool elements of the museum into places like that?
Yeah, how do you?
How do I do that? Well, thanks to my unusual set of skills and interests that didn't necessarily fit in well in normal life, I was able to look at Reese and go, hey, Reese, I'm going to build a dinosaur dig pit.
That was pretty much the look he gave me. Just
I'm
about
going
like
to build
that.
this. And he's like, okay, what do you need? Well, do we have any dinosaur casts? Well, not really. We have a lot of marine casts, but we don't have any casting and molding equipment. No problem, I'll make it. So what I did is I actually made it out of styrofoam and covered it with an epoxy resin type stuff. So I made this really cool Tenontosaurus skeleton that was actually modeled after a specimen from the Museum of the Rockies that I had been enamored with for a couple of years, that had a bunch of shed raptor teeth around it and little bite marks in the bones. And the idea there was they uncover this and they look at the evidence and they tell me the story, which is this is a Tenontosaur that got brought down by a few raptors and they shed their teeth. They're about, I don't know, 17 different little teeth there. So if one single raptor were to shed all of those teeth, that wouldn't work very well.
Did they really shed their teeth, or did they get ripped out when they're eating?
Yes. So I have discovered that there is no limit to what a person can do when they put their minds to it. So one of the things I've discovered is,
Where are we anyway?
well, this is our, what is this? This is our sort of our shop. So, we've got this really great shop where we can build our exhibits. So this is usually reserved for our exhibits and maintenance department when we need to build big things like walls and risers and all that kind of stuff. It was never a place that I expected that I would be spending a lot of time as the education and outreach guy. But guess what? Sometimes you find yourself coming up with unique ways to get things done. So I actually have spent a lot of time down here. One of the ideas I had was, a few years back, was using pop as a way to communicate science ideas. So what I mean by popular culture is things like taking a fictional animal, like a dragon, or in my case, I'm a big Star Wars nerd. So creatures that I saw in some of these movies, and I do my best to make them real, build full-size replicas. Now this is where Reese comes in and says, you're gonna need a big truck. I didn't think that far ahead. So now I think a little bit differently, but when I built that first creature, that big Tauntaun, it was for a program that I was doing last summer that was meant to go along with the Kansas Library System summer reading program. And I believe last summer it was a universe of stories. And of course my nerd brain, or bird brain, nerdy bird brain, went straight to what is the best story, and that would be Star Wars. So I had to build life-size Star Wars animals, and then I wanted to compare those life-size animals to our zoological collection mounts. We have a bunch of really cool taxidermy mounts. So I was able to compare different animals to different taxidermy mounts and even skulls and stuff. So as I was building this big animal, I wasn't thinking about how I was going to move it around. I was just thinking about how cool it was. So every once in a while, I need my boss to bring me back down to reality and think about how things work. So I've learned a lot since then, and now I build things in components. So I'm going to show you what my latest project is. So this year, the summer reading program, I can't remember exactly what it is, but what it basically came down to is we're going to do something that has to do with mythological creatures, with mythology. And so I thought, well, let's do a mythology to a paleontology program. Because there is actually some research out there, some honest to God science literature that has been published out there about early representations of fossils and how they might have been interpreted to be what we. So hopefully you're not totally losing me. We're kind of getting cut in and cut out, so I don't know if you're. Send us messages and I will do my best to reiterate whatever it was I might have been talking about that you missed. So
This sounds like a mammoth of a project.
It is a mammoth of a project. So the idea behind this was create some mythological creatures So in this case, this is a dragon I'm working on. And I will show you how the project starts. And this is about 3/4 of the way finished. This is just going to be a head mount. So we're just going to actually put this on like a crest, and it will be mounted on a wall, a wire wall. This is for a traveling exhibit, so I have to think about ways to make it travelable.
It's not Pete's dragon.
This is not Pete's dragon, this is Ian's dragon. So we have actually started working on the ecology of dragons and the biology of dragons and how these animals work, based upon some of the myths and legends out there. So this is a dragon. This is sort of your standard dragon that flies around and scoops up sheep. He doesn't have his teeth yet. He will have teeth here shortly.
Is it a dragon or a wyvern?
We're not going there right now. So this is actually made out of foam. Because again, I've got to think about how am I going to transport this stuff around? Now I have this wonderful life model of a mosasaur in my office that is made of fiberglass and resin. And it's great. The detail is awesome. The proportions are great. The problem is moving that thing around. This thing weighs about 70 pounds and it's fragile. So if it gets knocked or hit or dropped, something breaks, and then that means either I need to repair it and do a very, very good job, or I'm in trouble, or it's a complete loss. I don't want that to happen. So that's when I came up with the idea of, well, I need something that if it gets dropped, it's not going to shatter, it's not going to break, it's not going to cost us hundreds of dollars to replace or to repair. So I started using foam, and I discovered that I could make this foam hold texture. So I was able to do scales, and I'll explain how I did that here in just a little bit. But this holds really good detail. And what I discovered was I learned how to mix basically rubber cement paint. And that has been dabbed onto the surface of the foam to kind of give it this rubberized texture. So it's a lot like the animals that you see upstairs, the dinosaurs that you see upstairs, in the regard of it feels rubbery, doesn't feel like foam, but it's got the give that foam has. It weighs about 5 pounds, maybe. It's pretty light. It's actually lighter, I think, than a gallon of milk. So
It's hitting some turbulence in the wind.
So, and you can see a lot of the detail really just depends on shading and painting. So there's a little bit more work that goes into the shading and painting. I made the eyes out of a clear epoxy. I actually painted the eyes myself. And
Very expressive.
Yes. The eyelids will actually be painted to match the rest of the body. So this, like I said, this is about 3/4 of the way finished. So this is closer to a finished product. Our plan for this particular program is we want to have 3 different kinds of dragons. We wanted to have a sort of your traditional Smaug type flying dragon, or Harry Potter flying dragon, if you like. That sort of represents what most people think of when they see a dragon. And then we're going to go to a subterranean dragon that would live in caves and sort of, if you consider like an underground aquifer system, where there's an underground channel of caves and rivers. So this would be much more of a, I don't know, like a salamander that doesn't come out in the sun very often, that doesn't have a whole lot of pigment. It's going to be very, very pink and veiny and not have a lot of pigment to it. Its eyes are going to have this weird sort of reflection. Let me introduce you to that one. Now this is going to be less important or less recognizable because this one is in the very beginning stages of what we want it to look like. Let's see if I can find the. So this is Let me see if I can show you. Here, I got some tape here. So this is my template. And I was actually working with three very talented undergraduate students who were doing an internship for semester. Am I good? Can you hear me?
Keep going.
All right. So unfortunately, my students, due to the coronavirus precautions, got told to go home and not come back for spring break. So I lost my help. But I really want them to know that I miss them and I'm thinking about them. And we are still working on this together, although we're doing it remotely now. But this one was conceived and created by my students. And my students are Caden, Jared, and Caitlin. Caitlin is an incredibly talented artist, and she was the one that came up of sort of an underground, sort of translucent looking, that is a little bit unlike dragons that you might see, is what we're going for. This is sort of what the dragon will look like when we're done. And what we started with was a block of foam. And you can see there are lines here. What we had to do in order to get the big chunk that we needed is we actually got smaller chunks of foam and glued it together. So you can see we're starting to get the form of what this critter is going to look like. And this is mostly carved by hand. The best way I've discovered right now to carve foam is by using, basically these are insulation knives. And so you do a lot of smoothing and texturing with these very, very sharp knives that you don't want to cut yourself with. And this is the third or fourth animal that I've done in this style. You know, and you can just see that right now the process I'm in is smoothing things down. And once everything is smoothed down, then we'll start doing the details. Now the way I do the details is, I don't know if I have it down here or not. I use an old soldering iron. So if we were to, I'll bring it over here so we can compare it. Let's turn things this way. Once I get everything smoothed down, I get all the shapes done. Let us know if you're hearing me. We're having interruptions in our streaming, and I'm not sure how that looks on the other side of the screen. So do we have anybody watching us right now?
Yes, we've got, actually Jason Willoughby is watching, and we've got Betty Sterling who's talking about, excited that paleontology meets art.
Yes. So hopefully, guys, you're hearing me okay and I'm not frozen up. If I am, will you let us know? So as I was saying, once we get everything smoothed out the way we like it, and we get all of the shapes and, you know, all of the eyes and, you know, the nose holes and everything, that's when I start with the really fine detail. And what I use is an old soldering iron, which just one day I discovered by accident that I could use to create all of this fine detail, all of the scales. And, you know, this was just a happy accident, not to sound like Bob Ross. This is a happy dragon. I realized that you could get very, very detailed, and, you know, I sort of did the pebbly scales around the face, and then, you know, the larger scales going down the neck. So we're going to give this guy a similar treatment. Now, this guy's going to be a little bit more challenging because he's going to be this sort of subterranean, for lack of better references, think Gollum. Think Smeagol after he's been living in a cave. He's going to be real translucent. He's going to be very veiny. So he might have some scales going on here. I mean, you can kind of see there will be some texture. He's going to have spikes in rows here that'll come up.
Is he gonna have legs, or is he gonna be a legless lizard? Or is he gonna be
Skink-like, because he's subterranean and he's creeping around in these sort of moist and wet underwater caves with.
So he's not from Tremors.
No, he's not a sandworm.
Okay.
Or Dune, if you like.
Or Dune.
Hey, there's a new Dune coming. I'm really excited about that. So these are examples of finding ways to tell stories. Now, where is this leading to? Now, I started constructing animals that were fictional. And I did that for a reason. Mostly it's because I'm super sensitive and I don't like people telling me how messed up I am. So I figure if I start learning how to build animals that are make-believe, there aren't experts around that are going to tell me how wrong I am, and I can get some experience. So the next step, possibly next summer, is I want to start building dinosaurs and marine reptiles that are native to Kansas. So my goal is to build a Niobrarasaurus and to build a mosasaur.
What about sharks?
And to build a process to build a shark. I have a couple of other ideas for a shark. So I've been reaching out to different paleo artists and just sort of picking their brains for what kinds of techniques I could employ in my humble position, because I do not have formal art training. All of this stuff happens sort of as I go, and I never quite have a plan, or at least not a traditional plan. I have a vision, but the road to that vision is sort of a long and winding one. And the students that I've worked with in the past have watched in fascination as I go about constructing these, and hopefully they've learned a lot. But you'll notice this guy actually has multiple nostrils. I'm really excited about that. I don't know why I'm excited about multiple nostrils, but that's just something unique that you're not used to seeing. The other thing that I think I'm going to do with this guy is I'm going to add lights. I think I'm going to add sort of these weird sort of, again, sort of translucent like lights that lead up to the eyes. And the eyes are going to be kind of white. So that's my vision. So do you have any questions for me as far as building animals and where I'm going with this kind of stuff?
Elizabeth says, this is why I think it should be STEAM and not STEM. There is so much art involved in science, technology, engineering, and math.
And you are correct. I agree. I think there is a huge crossover in creative thinking, because in order for scientists to be able to envision these animals as they were in their environment when they were alive, I think it takes a degree of this. Now, there are scientists out there that are very, very technical that just stick in the fossil record. And I'm not bashing on them. I wish I was more like them, honestly, but I'm not. So this is how I work through bringing science. And while my starting place was not necessarily, well, that's not true. I actually started this with recreating fossils. So this is an example of one that's been damaged, is in need of some repair. And
Hi, Dara. Dara's watching.
Dara's watching. So this is why I've switched to materials that are a little bit less breakable. So this was my stab skeleton reconstruction. And what I did is I actually cast some mosasaur vertebrae molds that we've got. And I sort of cheated. These are actually 3 or 4 of the same vertebra repeated over and over and over. So this is not an anatomically correct mosasaur per se. But for the purpose I was using it for, this worked. And you can see that it's been really beat up. That this particular method did not hold up to traveling on the road, which is why I shy away from taking really, really nice fossil reconstructions and casts out on the road, because going out on the road is hard. So this lasted about 3 years. It's repairable, it's savable, and it looks worse than it really is. The skull is missing because I took it off because I wanted to use the skull for a couple of outreach programs I've had since then. For a couple of weeks, I haven't had a chance to get back in here. So now I know what I'll be doing for the next couple of weeks. I'll be hanging out down here, social distancing with my animals. So this is actually a skull of Tylosaurus canzensis. In this particular specimen, we actually have the real skull on display upstairs. This is a specimen that had his head crushed by another mosasaur. So this animal has a really, really cool story, and I use this as an exercise, usually with school children, about looking at the fossil evidence and trying to figure out what environment this animal lived in, what the cause of death was, any sort of story that you can tell from observing the fossils. So that's what I use this as when it's functioning. But as you see, it didn't hold up to being on the road for very long. And you run into the challenges of transport. This thing is, I would say, about 8 feet long, which is not really how long this animal should be in life. So after I started creating these things, I realized, okay, transporting them is a challenge. How do I do these things in components? And that's when I started thinking about, okay, do I want to build a whole animal, or do I want to build enough that just is enough to prompt people's imaginations to work for them, where they can start to visualize these animals as living entities, yet I don't have to stuff this living entity in our SUV for the museum. We do have an 8-passenger van, which is great if it's available, but full of his students. So 12-foot mosasaur in a van that is being used doesn't work very well. So that's why I've tried to break it into smaller components now. Now that's not to say that I'm not going to build a full-size animal broken into components that I can assemble on the road. But I also want these things to be able to use the library or a school. Now, if I were to go to a convention or to a state or a county fair, I want to have a really big setup, right? And I want to be able to just really wow people, make them actually feel like they're having a museum experience at that location. Well, then I can go really big. But I need to be able to present the same information in a small setting as well as a large setting. So that's where this is leading. That allows me to do that. Any more questions?
How do you train your dragons?
How do I train my dragons? They are untrainable. They are wily, foul-mouthed beasts. So just one of the aspects of being a museum professional, I've found a way to naturally drawn to talking to people about what we do. And I also have this crazy proclivity of wanting to know how things are made and what goes into designing a prop and how do you give the best product, what I call experience. A program where I'm standing up in front of a whiteboard or a PowerPoint presentation and going, this is what this is, this is what this is, this is, I don't want to do that. I want people to feel like they've had an experience, that they walk away with a memory, that, wow, that was really cool. Let's do that again. Let's go to that museum. So that's the goal I'm reaching for here. So are there any? Please ask questions. Anybody? So one of the other things that we're going to do here is I want to, for this program, I want to build actually our full-bodied life-size animal. And then we're going to build a model of a cyclops. Now, can anybody guess what fossils inspired which one of these animals? So, I'll give it a reason still when I was doing my broadcasts from home. But for this one, I'm considering, I haven't decided yet, but I'm considering a raptor skull of a Deinonychus. I have a Deinonychus raptor skull cast. So I thought that would be a fun comparison for our terrestrial dragon. Look for a comparable amphibian type thing. So something like a skink, or I guess, but something like come on, what's the state amphibian too? You know, whereas I don't want anything as colorful as a tiger salamander though. Lucent and hangs out in a cave. So I might have to find a picture of something somewhere rather than have a live specimen. And then the next dragon we're going to build is a marine dragon. So you can imagine what we're going to use for our marine dragon. I've got a couple of our Megacephalosaurus, which is a pliosaurid plesiosaur. And I've got an elasmosaur skull I can use. So I have to make a tough decision there. Do I want to use our elasmosaur with a long neck that looks sort of like the Loch Ness Monster? Or do I...
Big-headed.
That's the dragons. For the griffin, I'm going to compare that actually to Protoceratops skeletons that were found in Mongolia. And those were likely interpreted as griffins, because what ended up happening is their skulls are very beak-like, and their shoulder blades, when they would disarticulate, would kind of move up. So it almost looks like wing bones. So those as flying beaked creatures, and possibly with feather impressions. We don't know exactly. And then for flops, we're going to refer to a mammoth skull on the road. So again, we're going to have to use graphics. But if you think about how a mammoth skull works, they are proboscideans. They have this big trunk, right? Which is basically their nasal, their nose. And so they have this big opening where their nose was once there. Their trunk was, so they have this big hole, and early explorers and observers of these fossils interpreted that as a big one-eyed monster. So that's how we're going to get from mythology to paleontology. So I think we are running short on time. We've got some things going on at the museum that we've got to attend to, so we're going to wrap this up. As always, please like and share, and feel free to send us any comments. And we'll see you later this afternoon.